Hello, welcome back to Fallout 76. I've often said that the game should cater to players like camp builders, because people who buy from the Atom store are the ones who pay the extra money to keep the game going. I say this, even though I'm not one of them. I get all the free stuff from the Atom shop, of course, but I've spent atoms on a grand total of 3 items, and that's despite having 22,000 sitting around. So the obvious question is, why not? I actually do want to build a better looking camp, but there's several reasons why I don't. One of the biggest issues is that camp limits are very small. When I first started playing the game, I built a small camp across the creek from Somersville. I planted a few crops because back when I was low level, crops were actually useful for things like adhesive. And as time went on, I added a few decorations to meet weekly challenges. But I very quickly ran into the camp building limit. All I had was a few crops, some workbenches, and decorations. And I'm already at the building limit? That really discouraged me from trying to put together an actual building. If I wanted to have something resembling an actual home, with furniture and decorations, then it seemed obvious that that's all I'd be able to get. All the things like crops that actually helped my gameplay would have to go. I've since come to learn that crops are killers when it comes to camp limits, and I don't really need them anymore. But by that point, I'd become used to having a bare bones camp. I understand the camp limits exist because of performance reasons. There's only so much custom building that a server can handle. Since I first built my camp, a lot more complete buildings have become available. Basically, the entire building is a single item, so it takes up less server resources and therefore less camp budget. But they're all behind the Atom store. So one suggestion I'd have is to give 1 or 2 different types to new characters for free. That way they get used to using them from the start. I've also started to use my shelter a lot more strategically. Workbenches and other utility items now go into the shelter. Only resource collectors that produce over time, like purifiers and fruit producers, stay in the open world. And by the way, if you see my Waterworld camp in your server, feel free to come and stock up on some purified water. I never lock anything. Shelters were obviously added to reduce the server load by creating a separate instance, so all the decorations and other items don't burden the open world. But the biggest issue with this approach is that you can't fast travel to shelters directly, so you have to travel to the camp and then load into the shelter. I don't have them, but I have gone to some shelters that have open spaces. Those would be great to use as canvases for the really creative players. Just let them go wild and decorate as much as they like without camp limits. But the fact you have to go out of your way to find them discourages players from ever seeing them. And no, having a daily challenge to go visit another player's shelter is not going to fix this, because most shelters are pretty bare bones. What I think would really help is to swap over the way shelters and camps work. So at the moment, decorations and camp building is best done in a shelter, and resource collectors go outside. But instead of forcing resource collectors into the open world, make it so they can be added to shelters, and allow access to the collectors without needing to go into the shelter. So for example, interacting with the door lets you treat it like a container for all the collectors inside. From a technical perspective, resource collectors are in the outside world because they need to track time. But if you modify shelters to pass on those time ticks to the resource collectors inside them, then it should be theoretically possible for collectors to still produce inside shelters. So you would get the materials from the collectors, but you save the server resources needed to show and animate them in the open world. There's obviously effort needed to make these changes, but it would lead to a situation where the open world is being used to showcase well put together camps, while the utility items like resource collectors are hidden away. This will make it much more likely for players to see well crafted camps. And believe me, I've seen some camps that obviously had hundreds of hours spent on them. So while it's good to see a nice camp, a key limitation with camps is that they're purely decorative. A great looking camp is a wonder to behold. I know because I see my own camp every day, and it's not exactly the 8th wonder of the world. So I'm someone who appreciates well put together camps. But the problem is that you can only look at them. no matter how pretty something is. If all you can do is look, then that gets old. There are some interactable camp items, like games and gambling tables, but all they do is just give you an animation. You're not playing them, you're just seeing your character playing them without any involvement from you. There are also some pretty big construction items, like the Wavy Willets water slide, but if I'm not mistaken, you can't use them. Same with turrets. It's common for people to say that you're better off not having them because they actually attract more enemies, and they're usually very poor at dealing with them. When people visit player camps at the moment, it's to shop. Maybe you might take a quick look around the camp if it's pretty, but the primary reason is to shop. Making camp items interactable will give players an actual reason to visit camps. Yes, making interactable items would demand more effort from the development team, but it would make those items more attractive to the people who are dedicated to building great camps, which in turn would encourage more camp builders to buy those items, which means more revenue from the item store, but in a way that is not predatory. So let's say that my idea about moving resource collectors into shelters gets added. So that means most camps will be pretty low in terms of camp utilization. You just need a shelter and all your resource collectors, crops and workbenches are inside. Most of the time you would just interact with the door, but if you need to use workbenches or a bed, then you directly fast travel into a shelter. They distribute that spare camp limit to camp builders, which means that people who dedicate hours and hours into building camps can actually create something truly special. If these camps are interactive, then players would have a real incentive to visit them. Then allow these visitors, not the owners, to nominate best camps. At the moment, anybody can make their camp a best camp, which devalues that system. That allows those great camps to be seen across the entire player base. I can imagine someone coming up with something like a park ride, or a maze, or something that people will be interested in playing around in. Then because it's a best camp, people can build their own additions close by. And when those become best camps too, then you have something like Disneyland, with multiple forms of entertainment close to each other. And it's visible and interactable across all servers. I don't know if there's enough camp builders and enough sales from the item store to merit the extra effort to make camp items interactable, but I think this would be beneficial if it's possible. Even if all that happens is some quality of life changes being added, like say resource collectors being moved into shelters, I think that a few small changes could make a big difference to how attractive camps are.